Welcome to Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman. CBS News has fired TV icon Charlie Rose, host of CBS This Morning and 60 Minutes correspondent. PBS and Bloomberg say they're canceling their contracts and ending distribution of Charlie Rose's programs as more women step forward to accuse Rose of sexual harassment, bringing the total number of his accusers to at least 11. Rose is accused of groping women, making lewd phone calls, walking around naked or in an open bathrobe. The latest charges come from 3 female employees at CBS, one of whom says Rose whispered sexual innuendo in her ear while touching her inappropriately at a work event. President Donald Trump rushed to the defense of Alabama Republican Senate candidate Roy Moore Tuesday, pointing to Moore's denials of multiple accusations of sexual assault and harassment against teenagers. Trump also said voters should reject his Democratic opponent, Doug Jones.
We don't need a liberal person in there, a Democrat. Jones, I've looked at his record. It's terrible in crime. It's terrible in the border. It's terrible in the military. I can tell you for a fact, we do not need somebody that's going to be bad on crime, bad on borders, bad with the military, bad for the Second Amendment.
Mr. President, is an accused child molester better than a Democrat? Is an accused
Well, he denies it. Look, he denies it.
At least 9 women have stepped forward to say they were sexually harassed or assaulted by Roy Moore as children or young adults. The New Yorker magazine reports Moore was banned from a local mall and a YMCA in Alabama because he repeatedly badgered teenage girls. Trump himself has been accused of sexual harassment and assault by at least 16 women. A leaked Access Hollywood video from 2005 recorded Trump boasting about sexually assaulting women, saying when you're a star, they let you do it. Grab them by the pussy. Walt Disney animation executive John Lasseter said Tuesday he's taking a 6-month leave of absence, saying he'd made missteps in the workplace that included forcing unwanted hugs on female employees. The Hollywood newspaper Variety reports a number of Lasseter's female colleagues at Disney's Pixar studio say he behaved inappropriately and described a toxic and sexist workplace culture toward women. Elsewhere, Olympic gold medalist Gabby Douglas said Tuesday she was sexually abused by her team's doctor, Larry Nassar, becoming the 3rd member of the U.S. women's gymnastics team to step forward with charges. Nassar is in jail awaiting sentencing after he pleaded guilty to federal child pornography charges. On Capitol Hill, Congressmember Jackie Speer says her Democratic colleague John Conyers of Michigan was not one of 2 sitting members of Congress who she knows to have engaged in sexual harassment. Conyers reportedly settled a sexual harassment complaint in 2015 with a former staffer who alleged she was fired because she rejected his sexual advances. Congressmember Speer said Tuesday she knows of at least 2 other lawmakers who have engaged in sexual harassment, one Democrat and Republican. Earlier this month, Speer accused an unnamed colleague of exposing their genitals and said victims had their private parts grabbed on the House floor. Congressmember Speer has introduced the Me Too bill in Congress to reform sexual harassment policies on Capitol Hill. Among other reforms, the bill would end a mandatory cooling-off period before accusers could file sexual harassment claims. Elsewhere in Washington, D.C., FCC Chair Ajit Pai unveiled a plan Tuesday to roll back net neutrality, reversing Obama-era rules, barring corporate service providers from blocking access to websites, slowing down content, or providing paid fast lanes for Internet service. The plan is slated to face a vote in an FCC meeting on December 14th, where all 3 Republican-appointed commissioners on the 5-member FCC support ending net neutrality. Reaction to the announcement was swift. Former FCC Commissioner Michael Copps tweeted, quote, "This is an FCC chair gone rogue. How can one person be so zealous in dismantling the entire communications ecosystem and endangering our democracy?" Michael Copps asked. Net neutrality activists have launched a campaign to pressure lawmakers to intervene and are planning protests in cities across the country December 7th, when they'll march from Verizon stores to the offices of members of Congress. We'll have more on net neutrality later in the broadcast. In Zimbabwe, longtime leader Robert Mugabe reportedly resigned Tuesday, prompting massive celebrations in the streets of the capital, Harare, and other cities. Mugabe had ruled for the last 37 years since Zimbabwe's independence until he was placed under house arrest last week in an apparent military coup. In the Zimbabwean parliament, cheers erupted Tuesday after the Speaker of the National Assembly read from a resignation letter said to be written by Mugabe. Zimbabwe's military says it has installed Mugabe's former vice president and longtime political ally, Emerson Mnangagwa, as interim president. At the International Criminal Court in The Hague, former Bosnian Serb military general Ratko Mladic has been found guilty of genocide and other crimes over his role in the 1995 Srebrenica massacre and the siege of Sarajevo. The 74-year-old Mladic stood as Judge Alfonzori read the charges against him.
The indictment charged 2 counts of genocide and 5 counts of crimes against humanity, namely prosecution, murder, extermination, deportation, and the inhumane act of forcible transfer.
Just before the verdict was read, Mladic shouted and became combative, prompting the judge to clear the courtroom before rendering a guilty verdict, sentencing him to life in prison. As a military general, Ratko Mladic oversaw the massacre of 8,000 Muslim men and boys by Bosnian Serbs in Srebrenica in 1995. It's recognized as Europe's single worst atrocity since the end of World War II. In Lebanon, Prime Minister Saad Hariri said today he is suspending his decision to resign from office 2 weeks after he stunned Lebanon by announcing from Saudi Arabia that he was stepping aside due to unspecified concerns over his personal security. Hariri made the announcement after returning to Lebanon for the first time in weeks.
Today I presented my resignation to His Excellency, President Aoun, and he asked me to temporarily suspend submitting it and to put it on hold ahead of further consultations on the reasons for it. I expressed my agreement to this request in the hope that it will form a serious basis for a responsible dialogue.
Lebanon's president and others have accused Saudi Arabia of kidnapping Hariri. Hariri denies Saudi officials forced him to resign. Hariri turned to Lebanon alone. His wife and 2 children are reportedly still inside Saudi Arabia. In Iraq, at least 23 people were killed, scores more injured after a suicide bomber in a truck set off a massive explosion in a crowded marketplace in the northern town of Tus-Karmatu. There's been no claim of responsibility for the attack, which occurred as the Iraqi Prime Minister Haider al-Abadi said on state television his military had ended ISIS's presence in Iraq. The Trump administration's cautioning Americans against traveling to Saudi Arabia, not over the country's abysmal human rights record, but because of the threat posed by ballistic missiles fired into the kingdom by rebels in neighboring Yemen. Tuesday's travel warning by the State Department came just over 2 weeks after Houthi fighters launched a missile at the main airport in Riyadh. It was shot down and crashed in the desert. The warning came as British Labour Party leader Jeremy Corbyn condemned British support for the U.S. and UK-backed Saudi-led bombing campaign in Yemen, which has killed over 10,000 people, spawned a massive cholera epidemic, and put 7 million people on the brink of famine. In a public letter, Corbyn urged Prime Minister Theresa May to, quote, lift the Saudi blockade in order to stop this already catastrophic humanitarian crisis, becoming one of the worst combinations of famine and disease since the 1980s, with millions of innocent people, especially children, at risk of death, Corbyn wrote. Back in the United States, Haitian immigrants and their supporters are protesting the Trump administration's move to end temporary protected status, or TPS, for nearly 60,000 Haitians, including many who came to the United States after the devastating 2010 earthquake in Haiti. The decision will end a program that allows some Haitians to live and work in the U.S. and could see them face deportation by next July. In Palm Beach, Florida, hundreds of protesters gathered near President Trump's Mar-a-Lago golf club on Tuesday. And here in New York, Haitian Americans and elected officials gathered outside a U.S. immigration office. This is New York State Assembly member Yulian Yo.
I just think it's really inhumane and unconscionable, really, for the President of the United States to do this to folks who have side by side helped us to make our countries better, make our country stronger, and you know, I just hope that he will show more compassion, and I hope that our Congress will show thoughtfulness and humanity when it comes to issues like this one.
In Tennessee, campaigners are calling for the release of 25-year-old Toya Brown, who was sold into sexual slavery as a child and sentenced to life in prison after she killed a man who purchased her for sex. Brown was just 16 years old in 2004 when she was forced into prostitution by a pimp nicknamed Cutthroat, who beat and raped her on a regular basis. In 2004, Brown was tried as an adult and convicted on murder charges after she killed 43-year-old Johnny Allen, who took her to his home for sex. Brown says Allen was behaving erratically, owned a number of guns, and that she feared for her life when she shot him in the head and made her escape. The case has drawn widespread attention on social media under the hashtag #FreeCyntoia Pop superstar Rihanna wrote, quote, "Something is horribly wrong when the system enables these rapists and the victim is thrown away for life." And a second federal judge has blocked Donald Trump's move to bar transgender people from serving in the U.S. military, ruling the president's action is likely unconstitutional and is already causing harm. The ruling by U.S. District Judge Marvin Garbus goes further than an earlier injunction against Trump's policy by barring the Trump administration from denying funds for gender-affirming surgeries. And those are some of the headlines. This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman.
And I'm Juan Gonzalez. Welcome to all of our listeners and viewers around the country and around the world.